Terrence Blake had learned a long time ago that money couldn't buy respect. It couldn't erase the color of his skin or change the assumptions people made the moment they saw him. He'd built his technology empire from absolutely nothing, transforming a small software startup in his garage into a billion-dollar corporation that revolutionized cloud computing. His face had been on magazine covers. His TED Talk had millions of views. His charitable foundation had built schools across 3 continents. None of that mattered right now as he walked down the aisle of Flight 447 to Seattle, feeling every single pair of eyes in first class follow him with suspicion. He was wearing a simple gray hoodie and comfortable jeans, carrying a backpack he'd had since college because it reminded him of where he came from. After 3 exhausting weeks of international negotiations, he just wanted to be comfortable on this 6-hour flight home. He should have known better. In spaces like this, comfort was a luxury reserved for people who looked different than him. The white businessman in seat 1C pulled his laptop closer as Terrence passed. The elderly woman across the aisle clutched her designer purse tighter against her chest. A young couple exchanged knowing glances, their eyebrows raised in that universal expression of judgment. Terrence found his seat, 3A, settled in and pulled out his tablet. He could feel their stares burning into him, could hear the whispers that people thought were quiet but never actually were. He'd dealt with this his entire life, in every expensive restaurant, every luxury hotel, every exclusive space where his presence was questioned simply because of his skin color. The exhaustion of it never went away. You'd think by age 45, after achieving everything he'd achieved, he'd be immune to the sting. But it hurt every single time. The flight attendant appeared beside him almost immediately. Her name tag said Jennifer, and her smile was professionally friendly, but her eyes told a different story. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I need to verify your boarding pass." Terrence had been expecting this. He always expected this. Without a word, he handed her his boarding pass and watched her study it like she was examining evidence at a crime scene. She looked at the pass, then at him, then back at the pass, her lips pressed into a thin line of doubt. "This is a first-class ticket," she said slowly, as if explaining something he might not understand. "Yes, it is," Terrence replied calmly, though his jaw tightened with familiar anger. "That's why I'm sitting in first class." Jennifer's smile grew even more strained. "I see. It's just that we've had some issues recently with upgraded tickets being used improperly. I'm going to need to verify this with my supervisor. Just a moment, please." She walked away before he could respond, her heels clicking purposefully toward the front of the cabin. Around him, the whispers grew louder. Terrence caught fragments of conversations, each one like a small knife. Probably used someone else's miles. Maybe he won it in some contest. They really should check these things at the gate. Not one of them considered the obvious possibility that he'd simply bought the ticket like any other passenger. Not one of them saw a successful businessman taking a flight home. They saw what they'd been conditioned to see, a black man who didn't belong. Terrence closed his eyes and took a deep breath, thinking about his mother. She'd worked as a housekeeper for wealthy families in Connecticut, cleaning the homes of people who never learned her name, who left her Christmas bonuses on the kitchen counter like she was invisible. She'd saved every penny to send him to college, had believed in him when the world told her a black boy from their neighborhood had no business dreaming so big. "Baby," she told him 1,000 times, "you're going to have to be twice as good to get half as far. But you are twice as good. Don't you ever forget it." Jennifer returned, but she wasn't alone. Behind her marched a man in a captain's uniform, his face set in hard lines of authority. Captain's stripes gleamed on his shoulders, and he carried himself like someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. This was Captain Bradley Morrison, and Terrence could see immediately that this situation was about to escalate. Morrison's expression was stern, judgmental, already convinced of Terrence's guilt before even speaking to him. "Sir," Morrison said loudly, his voice carrying through the now silent cabin, "I'm going to have to ask you to gather your belongings and exit the aircraft. There's been a problem with your ticket, and we need to resolve this before departure." Every head in first class turned to watch. Terrence could feel their satisfaction, their vindication. Of course there was a problem. Of course he didn't belong here. Their prejudices were being confirmed right before their eyes. Terrence kept his voice level and calm, though fury burned in his chest. "There's no problem with my ticket, Captain. I purchased it 3 weeks ago through your airline's website. Confirmation number TH9364. Everything is legitimate and in order. What exactly is the issue?" Morrison's jaw clenched. "The issue, sir, is that this particular seat was reserved by a Mr. Terrence Blake, who is a platinum-level member of our frequent flyer program and a valued customer. We take ticket fraud very seriously. Now, I'm asking you one final time to exit this aircraft voluntarily, or I will call security to remove you." The accusation hung in the air like poison. Ticket fraud. Criminal behavior. Terrence felt the familiar weight of humiliation settle over his shoulders, heavy and suffocating. He'd been here before in different forms. Stopped by police while jogging in his own neighborhood. Questioned while entering his own office building. Followed by security in stores where he was about to spend thousands. But this felt different somehow. More public. More deliberate. More designed to humiliate him in front of an audience eager to witness his shame. "I am Terrence Blake," he said clearly, his voice carrying through the cabin with quiet authority. "This is my ticket. This is my seat. And I'm not going anywhere until someone provides me with an actual legitimate reason for this harassment." The word harassment made Morrison's face flush red with anger. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably, but most still watched with barely concealed satisfaction, enjoying the spectacle of someone they deemed unworthy being put in his place. "Sir, you need to comply with crew instructions immediately, or I will have no choice but to call airport security," Morrison said, his hand already moving toward his radio. "You are disrupting this flight and refusing to cooperate. This is your absolute final warning." Terrence could feel rage building inside him, hot and righteous, but he forced himself to remain calm. Losing his temper would only confirm everything they already believed about him. It would give them the excuse they wanted to paint him as aggressive, dangerous, threatening. "Then call security," Terrence said quietly but firmly, "because I have every legal right to be in this seat. I have my boarding pass, my identification, my confirmation number. Everything matches. The only problem here is that you looked at me and decided a black man in casual clothes couldn't possibly afford first class. That's racial profiling, Captain Morrison, and it's illegal. So please go ahead and make this official. I'd be very interested to see how your airline explains this." The cabin atmosphere shifted slightly. A few passengers now looked uncomfortable rather than smugly satisfied. An older gentleman in a business suit frowned thoughtfully. A young woman bit her lip, her expression troubled. But others still nodded approvingly at Morrison, supporting his actions, believing that removing Terrence was the right and proper thing to do. Morrison's hand hovered over his radio, uncertainty flickering across his face for just a moment before his expression hardened again with defensive conviction. Before Morrison could make the call, another flight attendant rushed over. She was older, with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her name tag identified her as Margaret, and she touched Morrison's arm urgently. "Captain, may I speak with you privately for just one moment?" she said, her voice low but insistent. Morrison looked annoyed at the interruption but stepped aside with her, heads bent together in urgent whispered conversation that Terrence couldn't quite hear. Terrence watched as Margaret pulled out a tablet, scrolling quickly through something on the screen. Her eyes widened dramatically as she found whatever she was looking for. She turned the tablet toward Morrison, pointing at something, and Terrence saw the exact moment everything changed. The captain's face went from angry red to deathly pale in seconds. His mouth fell open slightly. His hand dropped away from his radio like it had suddenly burned him. Margaret whispered something else, and Morrison's entire body seemed to sag with the weight of terrible realization. They approached Terrence again, but Morrison's demeanor had completely transformed. He looked like a man who'd just discovered he'd made a catastrophic, career-ending mistake. His hands trembled slightly. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool cabin temperature. "Mr. Blake," he began, his voice strangled and unsteady, "there has been a terrible misunderstanding. A terrible, terrible misunderstanding. I sincerely apologize for the confusion." "Confusion about what?" Terrence asked, letting the question hang in the air, making Morrison squirm. "What exactly confused you, Captain? I'm genuinely curious." Morrison looked like he wanted to disappear. The silence stretched uncomfortably as the captain struggled to find words that wouldn't damn him further. Finally he managed, "Your ticket is absolutely valid, sir. We should never have questioned you. This was completely inappropriate and I take full responsibility. Please accept my deepest apologies." But Terrence wasn't ready to let this go. Not even close. "That doesn't answer my question, Captain Morrison. What caused this confusion? Was it the color of my skin? Was it my clothing? What specifically made you assume I was committing fraud? Because I'd really like to understand the thought process that led to you threatening to have me forcibly removed from an airplane for the crime of sitting in a seat I paid for." The question cut through the cabin like a knife, sharp and unavoidable. Morrison opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. What could he possibly say? Any answer would be an admission of the racial profiling that everyone in this cabin had just witnessed. Margaret stepped forward, her eyes shining with what looked like tears. Mr. Blake, what happened here was completely wrong. Absolutely wrong. And I think there's something you should know. She paused, glancing at Morrison, who looked like he might actually be sick. You should know, Margaret continued, her voice shaking slightly, that according to our company records, you're not just a passenger on this flight. You're the owner. You own Wingspan Holdings, the parent company of this entire airline. Her words landed like an explosion. Gasps echoed through the cabin. Heads whipped around. The businessman's laptop slipped from his hands. The elderly woman's mouth formed a perfect O of shock. The young couple stared in horror. And Captain Morrison looked like the floor had just opened beneath his feet. The silence that followed was absolute and devastating. Terrence watched the realization spread across every face like wildfire. The platinum blonde woman who'd clutched her purse now looked mortified. The businessman who'd moved his laptop away seemed frozen in shock. Every single person who'd judged him, who'd assumed the worst, who'd enjoyed watching him be humiliated, now understood exactly who they'd been looking at. Not a fraud. Not a criminal. The man who owned everything they were sitting in. Before we go any further, I want to pause for just a moment and talk directly to you, my friend. If you're watching this and you've ever been in a situation where people judged you before they knew your story, where your worth was questioned because of how you looked, where you had to prove you belonged in spaces that should have welcomed you, I see you. Your story matters. Your pain is real. And I'd love to hear about your experiences in the comments below. Share your truth with this community. And if these stories speak to something in your heart, would you do me a kindness and subscribe to this channel? Turn on those notifications because we have so many more powerful, important stories to share. Stories about dignity, justice, and the power of standing up for what's right. Now let's get back to Terrence and see what happens next. That's correct, Terrence said, his voice steady and controlled despite the emotions churning inside him. I acquired Wingspan Holdings 11 months ago as part of my investment portfolio. This airline, along with 4 others, became mine. I've been flying routes regularly, anonymously, to understand how the company operates from a passenger perspective. To see how crew members treat people when they don't know who's watching. He paused, letting that sink in, watching Morrison's face drain of what little color remained. And today, Captain Morrison, I've learned more than I ever wanted to know about this airline's culture, Terrence continued. I've learned that a black man in comfortable clothes is automatically assumed to be a criminal. I've learned that protocol apparently means harassing passengers based on racial profiling. I've learned that my crew members are willing to humiliate someone publicly without any actual evidence of wrongdoing. That's very educational. His words were measured, calm, but they cut deeper than shouting ever could. Morrison looked like he was desperately searching for words that might save his career. Mr. Blake, sir, I had absolutely no idea who you were. If I had known, I never would have. He trailed off, realizing too late how that sounded. Terrence raised an eyebrow. If you'd known I owned the airline, you wouldn't have treated me like a criminal? But it was perfectly acceptable to treat me that way when you thought I was just a regular passenger? Do you understand that's exactly the problem, Captain? The truth of those words settled over the cabin like a heavy blanket. Some passengers were now actively avoiding Terrence's gaze, shame coloring their features. Others stared at their phones or magazines, suddenly very interested in anything except the scene unfolding before them. A few looked genuinely troubled, perhaps beginning to question their own quick judgments and assumptions. But the damage was done. They'd all participated in this humiliation, through their whispers, their stares, their silent approval of his treatment. Margaret, Terrence said, turning to the flight attendant who'd tried to intervene, thank you for at least attempting to stop this before it went even further. I appreciate that. Margaret nodded, tears now flowing openly down her cheeks. I should have spoken up immediately, Mr. Blake. I should have questioned this from the very start. What happened to you was wrong, and I'm deeply sorry I didn't do more to prevent it. Terrence acknowledged her apology with a small nod. At least one person on this crew had tried to do the right thing, even if she'd been too late. That counted for something in this nightmare. But Morrison, Jennifer, and every passenger who'd been so quick to judge him guilty? They had much to answer for. Captain Morrison, Terrence said, his voice taking on a formal, businesslike tone that somehow sounded more threatening than anger, I'm going to need a complete incident report filed immediately upon landing. Every detail. Every assumption. Every decision that led to you threatening to remove the owner of this airline from his own aircraft. Morrison nodded frantically, looking grateful to have any path forward that didn't involve immediate termination. Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir. I'll have it on your desk within hours of landing. And again, I cannot possibly apologize enough for my behavior today. It was inexcusable and unprofessional. You're right, Terrence said quietly. It was inexcusable. But here's what matters now, not your apologies but what actually changes. Whether incidents like this stop happening. Whether this airline becomes a place where every passenger is treated with basic human dignity regardless of their skin color. Jennifer, Terrence looked at the flight attendant who'd started this entire chain of events, who now stood frozen with tears streaming down her face. You'll also be filing a detailed report. We're going to examine the training you received, the protocols you claim to have been following, and determine whether this airline's procedures have built-in biases that need to be completely dismantled and rebuilt. Jennifer could only nod, unable to speak, her career clearly flashing before her eyes. But right now, Terrence continued, I'm going to take my seat that I paid for, my seat in my airline. And you're going to fly this plane to Seattle on schedule because all these other passengers have places to be, and they've already witnessed more than enough. He looked around the cabin, making deliberate eye contact with several passengers who quickly looked away. However, when we land, I'll be meeting with every senior executive of this airline. We're going to have very serious conversations about discrimination, implicit bias, and the culture that makes incidents like this possible. Morrison looked like he might actually faint from relief mixed with dread. Yes, sir. I understand completely, sir. We'll have everyone ready for your meeting. Good, Terrence said. Because I guarantee you if this happened to me, the person who owns this company, it's been happening to countless other black passengers who didn't have the power or platform to fight back. That ends now. Today. This airline will become better, or I'll find people who can make it better. As Morrison and Jennifer retreated, the cabin slowly returned to activity, but everything had fundamentally changed. The atmosphere was heavy with shame and discomfort. Passengers who'd been so confident in their assumptions now couldn't meet Terrence's eyes. The whispers had stopped completely, replaced by an uncomfortable silence that felt almost suffocating. People buried themselves in phones and tablets, desperate to escape the reality of what they just participated in. Terrence reopened his tablet, but his hands were shaking slightly. The adrenaline was starting to fade, leaving behind the raw pain of humiliation. He'd been through versions of this scene throughout his entire life, but it never stopped hurting. Never stopped making him feel like no matter what he achieved, no matter how successful he became, some people would only ever see his skin color, would only ever assume the worst, would only ever question his right to exist in certain spaces. A young black man seated several rows back caught Terrence's eye and gave him a subtle nod of solidarity and respect. That small gesture of understanding meant more than Terrence could express. This young man knew. He'd probably lived his own versions of this nightmare. The unspoken connection between them was brief but powerful, a reminder that Terrence wasn't alone in this fight, even when it felt unbearably lonely. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Terrence thought about his mother. She'd passed away 2 years ago, but her voice still echoed in his mind constantly. She'd always told him that success wouldn't shield him from racism, that money couldn't buy respect from people determined to see him as less than. Baby, you're gonna face this your whole life, she'd said. But you face it with dignity. You face it with strength. And when you get the power to change things, you change them. Not just for yourself, but for everyone who comes after you. You had that power now. The power to transform this airline, to implement real change, to ensure that what happened to him today wouldn't happen to others. That responsibility weighed heavily on him, but it also clarified his purpose. This wasn't just about his personal humiliation anymore. This was an opportunity to dismantle systemic discrimination, to force an entire corporation to confront its biases and do better. His mother would have been proud of that. She'd always said he was meant for more than just accumulating wealth. The flight to Seattle passed in strange, uncomfortable quiet. Terrence worked on his tablet, reviewing financial reports and strategic plans, but part of his mind was constantly replaying the incident. Thinking about all the times he'd swallowed similar humiliations. All the moments he'd chosen silence because the fight seemed too exhausting, too risky, too likely to confirm negative stereotypes. How many times had he made himself smaller to make white people comfortable? How often had he modified his behavior, his speech, his presence to fit into spaces that should have welcomed him exactly as he was? The mental taxation of being black in America was something he'd grown so accustomed to that he sometimes forgot how crushing it was until moments like these stripped it bare. Every day was a calculation. How to dress, how to speak, how to move through spaces. Always aware of being watched, judged, evaluated for threat level based on nothing but melanin. It was exhausting in ways that people who didn't live it could never truly understand. Periodically, passengers glanced his way with expressions ranging from curiosity to embarrassment to what might have been dawning understanding. The elderly woman who'd clutched her purse tried several times to catch his eye, perhaps wanting to apologize, but Terence had no interest in making her feel better about her prejudice. That emotional labor wasn't his responsibility. He'd spent enough of his life comforting white people through their guilt about racism. She could sit with that discomfort. Maybe it would teach her something. About halfway through the flight, Margaret approached his seat quietly. "Mr. Blake, may I bring you anything at all? Water, coffee, a meal?" He could see genuine remorse in her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly with emotion. "I'm fine, thank you, Margaret," he replied, his tone gentler with her than it had been with others. "But I do want to ask you something important. How often does this happen? How often do you see black passengers questioned and treated with suspicion like this?" Margaret's eyes filled with fresh tears. "More often than I'd ever want to admit, sir. It's usually more subtle than what happened today. Extra verification of boarding passes. Questions about upgrades and how they were obtained. Comments about whether someone's in the correct section. I've tried to speak up before, but..." She trailed off and Terence understood completely. The power dynamics, the fear of losing her job, the pressure to go along with discriminatory practices rather than risk her livelihood by challenging them. "That's going to change," Terence said firmly, his voice full of conviction. "When we land, I want you to document every single incident you've witnessed or heard about. Dates if you remember them. Details. Other crew members involved. Everything. Can you do that for me?" Margaret nodded eagerly, relief washing over her face. "Yes, sir. Absolutely. I've wanted to report these things for so long, but I never knew who would actually listen or care enough to do something real about it." "I'm listening," Terence assured her. "And I care deeply. This airline is going to become a model for how to treat all passengers with dignity and respect, regardless of race, regardless of clothing, regardless of anything except their basic humanity. That's not a promise. That's a guarantee." Margaret squeezed his hand briefly, gratefully, before returning to her duties. Terence watched her go, thinking about all the well-meaning people trapped in corrupt systems, wanting to do right but lacking the power or platform to create real change. As the plane began its descent into Seattle, Jennifer approached hesitantly, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Mr. Blake," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I know there's nothing I can say to make this right. What I did was horrible and wrong. I judged you based purely on your appearance and skin color, and I'm so deeply ashamed. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed you to know that I recognize how terrible my behavior was." Terence studied her for a long moment, seeing a young woman probably in her mid-20s, likely new to this job, definitely swimming in systems of prejudice much older and deeper than her individual bias. He could fire her easily. He probably should fire her. She'd initiated this entire humiliating incident. But he also recognized an opportunity for education, for genuine transformation, for creating an ally rather than just punishing an enemy. "Jennifer," he said finally, "do you truly understand what you did to me today? Not just the inconvenience or public embarrassment, but what you did on a deeper human level." She nodded, tears streaming down her face again. "I made you feel like you didn't belong. Like you were a criminal just for existing in that seat. I judged you based on racist assumptions I didn't even realize I was carrying inside me." My friends, I need to pause here again and speak from my heart to yours. If this story is touching something deep inside you, if you've experienced your own moments of being judged unfairly, of having to prove your worth when others are simply believed, please share your story in the comments. This community we're building is about truth, healing, and connection. It's about making space for voices that have been silenced. And if you believe in what we're doing here, if you want more stories that confront injustice and celebrate human dignity, please subscribe and turn on notifications. Tell us what themes you want us to explore next. What stories need telling? Your voice matters here. Now let's continue with Terence's journey. "Exactly right," Terence said to Jennifer, appreciating her willingness to truly examine her actions. "And here's what you need to understand. I'm successful and powerful. I own this airline. So I'll recover from this experience. But what about black passengers who don't have that power? Who get questioned and humiliated and have absolutely no recourse? Who just have to swallow that indignity and keep moving? Your actions today are part of a much larger pattern that destroys people's spirits, that tells them they're not worthy, that confirms every horrible message society has sent them about their place in the world." Jennifer looked devastated, but Terence continued because this lesson was crucial. That's what systemic racism looks like in practice. It looks like a young flight attendant who genuinely thinks she's just following proper protocol, but who's actually enforcing centuries of oppression and discrimination. You're not going to be fired today, but you are going to be part of the solution. You're going to help us develop new training programs. You're going to share your story and your mistakes so other crew members can learn. You're going to do the hard, uncomfortable work of examining your biases and unlearning prejudices you didn't even know you carried. Can you commit to that? Jennifer nodded vigorously through her tears. Yes, sir. I'll do absolutely whatever it takes. I want to be better. I need to be better than I was today. Terrence felt a small measure of hope at her obvious willingness to engage in that difficult self-examination. Maybe something genuinely good could emerge from this nightmare. Maybe Jennifer would transform into a real ally, someone who'd actively fight against the discrimination she'd once perpetuated without thought. Transformation was possible. He had to believe that. The plane touched down smoothly, and as it taxied toward the gate, Terrence gathered his belongings. Captain Morrison's voice came over the intercom, professionally announcing their arrival, but Terrence could hear the strain and fear underneath. The man knew his entire career hung in the balance, that every decision he made from this point forward would be scrutinized and evaluated for evidence of bias. That's exactly the accountability that should have existed all along. As passengers began deplaning, several paused by Terrence's seat. The young black man from the back smiled warmly. "Thank you for not staying silent, brother," he said simply, and Terrence understood all the weight those few words carried. "Thank you for fighting back. Thank you for using your power to protect people who look like us. Thank you for not accepting this treatment quietly." An elderly white gentleman stopped as well, his expression genuinely thoughtful and troubled. "Mr. Blake," the man said carefully, "I'm ashamed to admit that when this incident started, I assumed the worst about you. I let my prejudices cloud my judgment completely, and I apologize. You've given me a great deal to think about." Terrence appreciated the apology while recognizing its limitations. The man's willingness to examine his biases had only come after learning about Terrence's wealth and power. Would he have had the same epiphany if Terrence had been just a regular passenger? Probably not. But it was something. A start. Change happened slowly through countless small awakenings. Terrence stepped off the plane to find a nervous executive in an expensive suit waiting, flanked by security guards and what appeared to be the airline's entire legal team. The executive, a tall woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, extended her hand with a practiced smile that couldn't hide her anxiety. "Mr. Blake, I'm Catherine Wells, Chief Operations Officer. On behalf of Wingspan Airlines, I want to personally apologize for what you experienced today. We've been fully briefed, and I assure you we're taking this with absolute seriousness." "Are you?" Terrence asked, his voice neutral but challenging. "Because this looks like damage control to me, not genuine concern about systemic problems." Catherine's smile faltered slightly. "Sir, we have a conference room prepared if you'd like to discuss this privately. Captain Morrison has already filed his preliminary report, and our entire executive team is standing by." "Good," Terrence said. "Because we're going to have a very long, very honest conversation about the culture of this airline and what changes immediately." The conference room was sleek and expensive, with windows overlooking the Seattle skyline. Around the polished table sat 8 executives, 7 of them white, all wearing expressions of barely concealed panic. Terrence took the seat at the head of the table deliberately, a clear statement about who held power in this room. "Let's establish something from the start," he began, his voice carrying absolute authority. "What happened to me today wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symptom of deep cultural rot in this organization. We're going to cure that disease completely, or I'm going to find executives who will." Catherine cleared her throat nervously. "Mr. Blake, we absolutely agree what happened was unacceptable. We're prepared to offer appropriate compensation, and we'll ensure Captain Morrison and the flight attendant face disciplinary action." "Compensation?" Terrence's voice was dangerously quiet. "You think money solves systemic racism? You think firing 2 employees addresses the root problem? Let me tell you what's actually going to happen. First, comprehensive audit of every discrimination complaint filed in the past 5 years. Every single one. I want patterns identified and addressed." He pulled out his tablet, projecting notes onto the conference room screen. "Second, complete review of hiring and promotion practices. I want demographic breakdowns at every level. How many black pilots? How many executives of color? The numbers will tell us exactly what kind of company this really is. Third, mandatory anti-bias training for every employee from executives to baggage handlers. Not superficial workshops. Real, meaningful education about systemic racism and implicit bias. Fourth, independent oversight committee with actual authority to investigate complaints and recommend consequences. Fifth, measurable diversity goals with real accountability. The CEO, a thin man named Robert Chin, finally spoke. "Mr. Blake, these initiatives will require significant resources and time. We can't restructure everything overnight." Terrence fixed him with a hard stare. "Robert, when I acquired this company, you restructured the entire financial framework in 3 days to maximize returns. You found resources then. So don't tell me we can't find resources now for basic human dignity. What you're really saying is profit matters more than people. That's exactly the problem we're fixing." The silence that followed was heavy and uncomfortable. Finally, the HR director, a woman named Lisa Tomlin, spoke up. "Mr. Blake, what timeline are you envisioning for these changes?" Terrence appreciated the concrete question. "I want detailed implementation plans in 2 weeks, quarterly progress reports, full transparency, and actual measurable results, not empty promises. Anyone who can't commit to that vision can leave now." Nobody moved, though several executives looked like they wanted to. "Good," Terrence continued. "Because here's what you all need to understand. I didn't build my success by accepting mediocrity or tolerating injustice. This airline will become a model for corporate equity and inclusion, or it will be sold to someone who shares that vision. There's no middle ground anymore." Over the following weeks, Terrence threw himself into transforming Wingspan Airlines with relentless intensity. He reviewed every discrimination complaint personally, each one more heartbreaking than the last. A black pilot passed over for promotion 7 times. Latino crew members consistently assigned worse routes. Asian American staff subjected to constant microaggressions. The patterns were undeniable, damning, systemic. This wasn't about individual bad actors. This was about organizational culture that enabled discrimination at every level. He interviewed dozens of employees privately, creating safe space for honest testimony. The stories made his blood boil. Passengers refusing flights with black pilots. Muslim employees forced to remove religious garments. Management consistently prioritizing customer comfort over employee dignity. Each story fueled his determination. He documented everything meticulously, building a comprehensive case for fundamental transformation. He brought in external consultants, genuine experts in organizational change and anti-racism work. Together they designed training programs that went far beyond typical corporate diversity seminars. These would be intensive ongoing experiences challenging participants to examine their biases, understand historical context, recognize how individual actions contributed to systemic oppression. Mandatory, comprehensive, with real accountability. The resistance came quickly and predictably. Executives worried about costs. Crew members complained about mandatory training. Some passengers threatened to take business elsewhere. Terrence had expected all of it. Change always met resistance, especially change threatening existing power structures. But he was absolutely unmoved. "Anyone who objects to treating all people with dignity isn't someone we want here," he told Catherine when she expressed concerns about losing customers. Media attention was immediate and intense. A prominent black tech entrepreneur confronting racism in his own airline made compelling headlines. Terrence initially resisted interviews, not wanting to center himself in a story bigger than his individual experience. But his team convinced him that speaking publicly could amplify the message, pressure other companies to examine their practices. So he agreed to carefully selected interviews with trusted journalists. Social media exploded with reactions. Thousands of people, mostly people of color, shared their own stories of airline discrimination. The hashtag became a rallying cry, a space for collective testimony. But there was also intense backlash. Critics accused Terrence of exaggerating, of playing the race card, of bullying employees. Some suggested he should have been grateful for the apology rather than demanding change. The criticism stung, but Terrence had learned long ago not to let others' opinions deter him from doing what was right. What surprised him was unexpected support. White executives from competing airlines reached out privately, admitting they'd witnessed similar incidents, asking for guidance. Flight attendants from other carriers sent messages saying his courage inspired them to report discrimination they'd previously accepted silently. Even some passengers from that original flight contacted him, apologizing for their assumptions, sharing how the experience forced them to examine their own biases. Change was rippling outward in ways Terrence hadn't anticipated. 6 weeks after the incident, Wingspan Airlines held its first company-wide anti-bias training. Every single employee participated in the same intensive 3-day program, from Terrence himself to the newest hire. He insisted on universal participation to send a clear message: nobody was above needing education and growth. The training was deliberately uncomfortable, as it needed to be. Participants confronted their prejudices, sat with discomfort of recognizing their complicity, understood that good intentions didn't negate harmful impact. Captain Morrison attended looking like he'd aged 20 years in 6 weeks. He'd submitted his resignation immediately after the incident, but Terrence had refused it. "You don't get to run away from this," Terrence had told him firmly. "You're going to do the work of becoming better. You're going to demonstrate what real accountability and transformation look like." Now, watching Morrison engage deeply with the material, asking difficult questions, visibly wrestling with his biases, Terrence felt cautiously hopeful about genuine change. Jennifer had thrown herself into the transformation process with almost desperate intensity. She volunteered for the training development team, sharing her story as cautionary tale, allowing herself to be vulnerable and accountable before colleagues. Terrence watched her facilitate a particularly difficult session about microaggressions, and he was genuinely impressed by her growth. She'd never forget the harm she caused, but she was channeling that shame into meaningful action. Margaret, the flight attendant who tried to intervene, was promoted to newly created Director of Passenger Equity position. Her job was ensuring training principles translated into actual policy and practice. She took the responsibility seriously, conducting surprise evaluations, reviewing complaint data, holding crew members accountable. She'd found her true calling in this work. The demographic audit results were exactly as disturbing as Terrence had anticipated. Despite serving incredibly diverse customers, Wingspan's workforce was overwhelmingly white at management levels. 89% of executives were white. 94% of pilots were white men. Even entry-level positions showed people of color underrepresented and concentrated in lowest-paying roles. The data painted a brutally clear picture of systemic exclusion. Terrence published the numbers internally, refusing to let anyone look away from uncomfortable truth. "This is where we are," he wrote in a company-wide memo. "This is the reality we created. Now let's talk about where we're going and exactly how we're getting there together." The company implemented blind resume screening to reduce hiring bias. They partnered with historically black colleges to recruit diverse talent. They created mentorship programs pairing junior employees of color with senior leaders. Clear promotion criteria that couldn't be subjectively manipulated. Zero-tolerance policy for discrimination with transparent investigations and real consequences. Month by month, the culture genuinely began shifting. It wasn't quick or easy. There were setbacks, frustrations, moments when Terrence wondered if real change was truly possible. But the data showed measurable progress. More diverse hiring. Fewer discrimination complaints. Better employee satisfaction scores across all demographics. The work was paying off slowly but surely. 1 year after the incident, Terrence deliberately booked that same flight route to Seattle, first class, wearing casual clothes. He wanted to test whether anything had truly changed or if reforms were just superficial performance. This time, when he boarded, the flight attendant greeted him warmly by name, verified his boarding pass without suspicion, welcomed him to his seat with genuine hospitality. Other passengers barely glanced his way, absorbed in their own concerns rather than scrutinizing his presence. It was exactly what flying should always have been: unremarkable, routine, free from the burden of proving his right to exist in that space. But the work wasn't finished. It would never truly be finished. Dismantling centuries of systemic oppression wasn't a project with a completion date. It was an ongoing commitment, a daily choice to do better, to be better, to create space for everyone's full humanity. Terrence expanded the model he'd developed at Wingspan to his other business ventures. Every company in his portfolio underwent similar audits, implemented similar reforms, held themselves to similar accountability standards. The ripple effects continued spreading. Other airlines, pressured by public attention and employee advocacy, began implementing their own anti-discrimination initiatives. Some were genuine comprehensive efforts. Others were performative shallow gestures designed to deflect criticism without addressing root causes. Terrence learned to distinguish quickly between them, and he wasn't shy about publicly calling out the latter. He'd become something he never intended: a public figure in the fight against corporate racism. It was exhausting and necessary, uncomfortable and meaningful. His mother would have been so incredibly proud, he thought often. She'd always known he was meant for more than just accumulating personal wealth. 2 years after the incident, Terrence was invited to speak at a major conference on corporate responsibility and racial equity. Standing before an audience of executives, activists, and journalists, he told his complete story. Not just the plain incident, but everything that followed. The resistance he'd faced. The victories he'd celebrated. The ongoing challenges. The moments of doubt and breakthrough. "Here's what I've learned," he said, his voice carrying through the hall with hard-won wisdom. "Power without principle is just oppression wearing different clothing. But power wielded with genuine intention, with real accountability, with authentic commitment to justice, can actually transform systems. Not overnight. Not easily. But truly, measurably, meaningfully." He continued, speaking directly to the lived experience of everyone who'd faced discrimination. "What happened to me on that plane was wrong, but it created an opportunity. An opportunity to use my privilege and platform to dismantle structures that allow such incidents to happen. We can't just be angry about injustice. We must actively work to destroy it. We can't just wish for a better world. We have to build it deliberately, brick by brick, policy by policy, difficult conversation by difficult conversation." The sustained standing ovation that followed was deeply moving. But more important than applause were the conversations afterward. Executives approached with genuine implementation questions. Employees of color thanked him for using his voice courageously. Young people told him his story inspired them to pursue business careers because they now believed they could create change from inside systems. These connections reminded Terrence why the fight mattered. He returned home that evening to his wife Diana, who greeted him with extraordinary news. She was pregnant. They were going to have a child who would grow up in a world Terrence was actively working to improve. The responsibility felt both terrifying and sacred. What world was he bringing this child into? What experiences would they face because of their skin color? How could he protect them while teaching them to stand strong in their identity? As months passed and Diana's pregnancy progressed, Terrence found himself feeling something unexpected: genuine hope. Real, tangible hope that his child would inherit a world incrementally more just than the one he'd known. Not perfect, not free from racism, but measurably more aware of its failures and committed to addressing them. The reforms at Wingspan were holding strong. Culture was genuinely shifting. Other companies were following suit. Young people were demanding accountability in unprecedented ways. When their son Julian was born, Terrence held his tiny perfect body and made a silent sacred promise. He would continue the work his mother had started, the work he'd intensified after that humiliating incident. He would build a world worthy of Julian, where his brilliance would be recognized before his skin color, where his potential wouldn't be limited by others' prejudices, where he could simply exist as himself without constant justification. 3 years after the incident, Terrence sat in a first-class cabin with Julian sleeping peacefully in his arms. The flight attendant, a young black woman, smiled warmly. "He's absolutely beautiful," she said, admiring his son. "Thank you," Terrence replied, his heart completely full. "He's my entire world." The woman leaned closer, her voice dropping. "I wanted to say thank you, Mr. Blake, for everything you've done. I'm a recent hire, and this airline's commitment to equity is exactly why I applied. It's why I believed I could build a career here. So thank you for making space for people like me." Terrence felt tears prick his eyes. This was why it all mattered. Not headlines or awards or recognition. This young woman pursuing her dreams in an industry that might have excluded her. That was the point of everything. As the plane took off, Terrence gazed out the window thinking about journeys. The physical journey between cities. The personal journey from humiliation to empowerment. The collective journey from injustice toward equity. All interconnected, all meaningful, all ongoing. He'd never forget that day, the way he'd felt when Morrison threatened to remove him from his own airline. The anger, shame, exhaustion of being constantly questioned. But he'd transformed that pain into purpose, that humiliation into action, that individual incident into systemic change. Somewhere out there, another young black person would benefit from that transformation, would face one less barrier, one less assumption, one less moment of discrimination. The fight wasn't over. It would never be over. But every victory mattered. Every policy changed, every bias examined, every person held accountable, every opportunity created. These were the true measures of success. Not wealth or power or recognition, but the incremental creation of a more just world. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling Julian's weight against his chest, allowing himself peace. "You done good work. He was still doing it. And he would continue for as long as he had breath. For Julian. For that young flight attendant. For his mother's memory. For everyone ever told they didn't belong. For the future he refused to stop believing in. My friends, we've reached the end of Terrence's powerful story, but this conversation is far from over. If this touched something deep in your heart, if you've lived your own version of being underestimated or discriminated against, I want you to know your story matters. Profoundly. Your experience has real value. Your voice deserves to be heard. Please take a moment and share in the comments below. Tell us about times you've had to prove yourself when others were simply believed. Tell us about witnessing injustice and whether you stayed silent or spoke up. Tell us what themes you'd like us to explore next, what stories need telling, what truths need speaking. And if you believe in what we're doing here, if you want to be part of this community that values truth, justice, and human dignity, would you honor us by subscribing to this channel? Turn on those notifications so you never miss a story. We're building something important together. Not just a channel, but a space for reflection, growth, connection, and real change. Your presence matters. Your engagement matters. Your willingness to confront difficult truths and imagine better futures matters deeply. Thank you for being here with open hearts. Thank you for listening to Terrence's story. Thank you for caring about justice. Keep fighting for what's right. Keep using whatever power you have to lift others. Keep believing change is possible even when it feels impossibly hard. Remember, every time you treat someone with dignity who others would diminish, every time you speak against injustice when silence would be easier, every time you create space for someone's humanity, you're changing the world. One interaction, one moment, one choice at a time. That's how transformation happens. Together with intention, courage, and love. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.